If you're working with Power BI, you probably know that matrix visuals are hard to deal with. That usually comes from the way that the formatting works, and it's really hard to get it to look exactly like you want. Here I have a cash flow statement, and this has only been really possible for me to make because of the new Microsoft Power BI desktop up. This one is from May 21st, 2024, and what it's actually brought us is matrix layouts. Layouts is a new kind of selection in the formatting pane, which allows you to very quickly just select a specific type of layout. For example, you could choose compact, and that might give you something that looks like this. You might pick an outline, and that might give you something that looks like this. And you might select tabular, and it might look something like this. In practicality, it's a really nice quality of life change. And today I'm going to show you how to make this cash flow statement. If you want to follow along, you can just go to my GitHub and download the starting point Power BI file, which will be just an empty file with all of the measures and all of the data that you need. So you'll just have a blank starting point, and we'll go ahead and make this report. As always, all of the links are going to be in the description, and you can actually go and check out my previous video on how to do this in a native Power BI table, which is going to accompany a lot of the different techniques that I use in this matrix. Some of the SVGs here do come from Anjay, who has his own YouTube channel where he actually made these SVGs, as well as his GitHub. So let's get into it. The cash flow statement here, one of the cool things that I'd actually like you to, check out is the fact that we have different activities. The activities are summed at their activity level for the past year and the actual year. We've got the delta PY, which is just actual minus past year, as well as the percentage difference, delta PY, which is the delta PY divided by past year to get a specific percentage of how much things increased or decreased. This is actually really nice to, see, because you've got the sum, the net cash of all of the operating activities very clearly visible, and it's also bolded, but also for all activities, you've got the net change that shows what is the sum of all of these things together. So 25.9 million for the past year, 42.7 million for the actual year. But the cooler thing here in this actual, statement is, if I make this a little bit bigger, is that at the very end, you've got total cash at the start of the year. So this is the start of the year that the past year started with. So the past year started with 770.9 million. And with a net change of 25.9 million, the total cash at the end of the year was 796.8 million. That means that at the current year, the actual year, the value should be 796.9 million that you start with. And that's why this is actually showing the cash flow of the last year, as well as the cash flow of this year. So 839.6 million, the cash that you ended with this year, will be what you start with next year. And that's basically how the story goes. Now, we should also take a quick look at what the data looks like. Right now, the data is a little bit weird. We've got an index, which honestly I'm not using, a type, which has some blanks in it, as well as an activity type and a description. The year and the cash flow amount value is here, and I've actually just got total cash start of year just listed as part of the data. This is a little bit weird, but it's going to make sense why all of this is being done in just a second. So for 2021, we've got all of these different items, and all of the different activities here are going to be operating activities, investing activities, financing activities, etc. And the description here actually defines what we're going to see in the Power BI report. So if we go back and just take a quick look, you'll see that you've got opening activities as the actual activity type. You've got the description here, whether it's adjusted, changes in net, in assets and liabilities as the actual description of what the cash flow was, what year it came from, and the actual cash flow itself. You'll also see that the sums that you actually see here aren't in the actual data set. That's the whole point. That's what the matrix is going to do. So let's just dive right in. That's all of the information that we need. And we will go back here and I'll explain some of the choices with why I've done this in just a second. So I'm going to open up a new blank page, and I'm going to just start by creating, of course, let's throw in activity type and make that into a matrix. I'm going to make it big already. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just make sure that the global font is pretty big. So let's make the global font maybe 14. be a little bit easier for people to see. Maybe let's make that 18 for now. So we've got activity type, financing activities, investing activities, and operating activities, as well as a little bit of blanks. That's totally fine for now. And after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the data, and I'm also going to add a little bit more stuff. So we've got the activity type. I'm also going to add the description here, and I'm going to click on this fork that you see once you hover over things. You can also just do the same thing by right-clicking on the columns and expand to next level. But right now I've got all of this down here. We're also going to put in the year into the columns as well as cash flow into the values. And now you'll actually be able to see, sorry, is that cash flow? Yes, it should be cash flow into the values. So I'm not able to do this right now because the cash flow itself is just dragging and dropping is an implicit measure, which is fine. I'm not actually using this, but I'm just going to show this to prove a point. Sum of cash flow. Now, the people who, it's like know about calculation groups might see that I have a calculation group. That's why I can't drag and drop certain things. That's okay. It's not really that big of a deal. I'm going to put this measure into values, and you can actually see that if I do that, then you can see the 2021 and 2022 values, as well as the total. Now, we're going to just use this for a little moment, just because I want to show you how this works. First, I'm going to go to the measure. I'm going to click on this, what is this, the comma here, so that you have a little bit more separation. And then what we're going to do is I am going to just show you the first thing. Layout and style presets. That's where this new, matrix layouts exists. So if you go to the format pane and like third thing down, layout and style presets, compact. Now, the first thing that I really like to do on matrices is go to the style and I'll select none, because I really don't like, it's like how it usually looks. There's a lot of different styles. I don't like to use them all that much. I like to start with none or minimal, and then I'll work myself through all of the different things. If you like using default, that's not a problem. It's like do what you like. But here, so compact is what it looks like in the very beginning. Now you can click outline and you can see that instead of having everything in just one row, now you have two different rows for every single column. And well, every single row that you've added. So there's two hierarchies of rows. So for each hierarchy, a new column has been created. That's pretty cool. And if you click repeat row headers, you can actually see that for all of the activity types that exist for each line, they are being repeated. That could be cool, good for some people. Maybe you don't need that. That's okay. And then you've got tabular, and tabular is a little bit different, and it's a bit more apparent when you it's like turn off the repeat row headers. And if I have tabular, you can actually see that the difference between outline and tabular really just seems to be that the total is above or below. But actually, if you go and look at what the outline and tabular is supposed to be, yes, the total does have a class, exists at the top, and here the total exists at the bottom. But with the tabular model, you've got the top item, it's like America, South, Colombia, it's like at the very top, and then you can open these things outwards. Whereas here you can see that it kind of stages downwards, so that's, it just seems to be a big difference of where the total is. And, it's like, that's okay. You can just click on the selection and it will change that for you very quickly. For now, what we're using in our existing one is, let me go select this and I'll show you, is the outline. And there's a big reason for that. It's because if we use the compact or, for example, the tabular, maybe things will be a slightly bit different. But I'm going to show you right now. We're starting out with, it's like the outline, and we'll, it's like just keep going. You can see that the main difference between the outline and the tabular is that with the outline here, let's see if I can hide this for so it's a bit more apparent. So with the outline here, you can actually see that there are spaces being, it's like created, whereas with the tabular version, there are no additional spaces for each hierarchy. And, I much prefer it this way because it adds a little bit more white space, more breathing room, so you can see what the clear separation of these items are. Okay, so we're going to go with outline. Great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just to let you know, when it comes to the actual items, when it comes to the actual columns that we're putting here, we're not going to be using these columns and the year. I just wanted to show you this very quickly to show what the difference between the layout and style presets are. But The reality is that if you use year 2021 and 2022 without doing a couple of workarounds, it's not possible to get delta PY, get this bar chart and everything else. So instead of using columns year, I'm actually going to be using AC, which is going to be the actuals. So that's just calculating the sum of cash flow for the year 2022 and past year, which is the sum of cash flow for 2021. Perfectly fine. And let's just add those past year and actuals into the values. I'm gonna just change the name right here to remove the underscore at the start of the actual measure name, which is completely fine. And then I have delta PY. Delta PY is simply, like I said, actuals minus past year. We're going to throw that in as well. And delta PY percentage is dividing delta PY divided by PY. So in actual words, that's making sure that delta PY percentage is actuals minus past year divided by past year. I'm also going to change this into a symbol. So if you put, so I'm using a Windows computer, and if you hit the Windows key and the semicolon, then your GIF window should show up. And if you click this button here that says symbols, I can use this button here to create this triangle, which is the Greek word for delta, which basically symbolizes change since past year, change since past year in percent. That's basically it. Okay, now we're here and I want to make this look a little bit cleaner. This is a little bit hard to look at. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at specific column. Now I've put in these different columns and I can go to the specific column, which is a little bit further down, and I can see display units. If you're not sure where things are, you can always go to the format search bar and look for example, display units, and I can find that very quickly. But I'm going to go to the specific column because I want to make sure that the series that I'm selecting is the right one. So right now, past year is selected. We're going to make the display units into millions, and we're going to make that 1 decimal place. And then I need to go down and I need to do that for all of the different items. So for actuals, I'm going to set it the same. For delta PY, I'm going to set it the same. A little bit of a chore, but that's okay. Delta PY percent, it's a percentage. It can stay a percent, and that's not a problem. Okay, so we have all of this here now. What do we do next? What we're trying to get to is here, as you might see, and you can also already see that there are some weird differences. The main reason for that is because in the dataset, we have an additional hierarchy that we've placed in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what it looks like for that. Now, the main thing here is if you wanted to do a couple of things, like, for example, you want the totals to be at the bottom, which is what I want to do. We can go to the row subtotals. And if you click the row subtotals, you can actually see that there's a subtotal label. So I can change that to net change, for example. And if I do that, then you can see that the net change is now what the total description is. But you can now also see that has changed the total name at every level. Maybe I don't want that, and if that's the case, what I need to do is I need to click the per row level. If I select this, and here I'm just going to remove, it's like whatever I had here. I'm going to go down to the description level, so this column level. I do want to show subtotal, and I want the subtotal to be called net change. Great. And then I'm going to go to the activity type, and I want this to be called something else. Let's call this net, it's like total change. And you can see that they are actually called 2 different things now. This is good. You can actually see that the position and values is now grayed out, and that is, it's like natural because the matrix wants these, it's like different totals to be formatted the same way so that they're easy to recognize. So I have to select all, and these things will become ungrayed, and I can finally select them. So I'm going to click bottom, and if I click bottom, you can actually see that the net change went from the top to the bottom. So now it is significantly different from, the tabular mode. So from top to bottom, and this is what I'd like to show. I'm just gonna, sort it by activity type because that's actually the order that I'd like it to be in. And that's pretty cool. You can actually see that this is nice, but one of the problems that you could maybe already see is that for this blank activity type, total cash and cash equivalents beginning year, this is actually what I want to show. But if it has only 1 row, it's basically just duplicating itself. It's got 1 value, and then this row is the same duplication, and I'm going to show you how we're going to work around that in just a little bit. But for now, let's keep going. So we're actually already pretty close to the format that I want. Now let's spend a little bit of time to get the delta py, it's like all of these different bars in. The delta py, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click on this delta py and I'm going to hit conditional formatting font color. Now, if I hit the font color, I can click on the format style, click on field value and select color, which is something that I've made. Color here is basically something that is showing if the delta py, if the difference between actuals and past year is greater than 0, show it to be green, otherwise show it to be red. Pretty straightforward, but the first problem here is that you can see that it does not affect the totals. So what you need to do is you need to right click on this, click on conditional formatting font color again, and make sure that it applies to values and totals. You can also select it to to affect totals only, but we want it to affect values and totals, so we're going to do that. And now we can actually see that the totals are also green or red based on, it's like if based on the actual value. Awesome. Now we're going to add the bar, which is basically just using this. Delta py bar is just delta py, but I want to add this right after delta py. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to do conditional formatting data bars. Here it's actually really simple. All you need to do is just put data bars. It's going to apply to values only right now by default. So I want it to apply to values and totals. And if I do this, here's the main problem. So if I put it to values, lowest value and highest value just exist. So for a positive bar, I could just put random green color. It doesn't really matter. The actual RGB, and then I can put a red color, sorry, not for the axis, but a red color in the negative bar. And if I click show bar only, it works great for all of, it's like the different values. But if I want to show this bar for the actual totals, let's go back to data bars, and I want to go for values and totals, it asks me to insert a minimum and maximum value. This isn't something that you can, dynamically change. So sometimes this can be a huge pain and is a really good reason why you shouldn't use this for values and totals. But for now, we're going to put minus 42 million as well as 42 million on the maximum. And that's because the biggest number here in delta py is the net total change, which is around 42.8 million, which is fine. Like, it shows the data. The main thing here is that if you wanted this to be actually, it's like dynamic and change based around the value and not just around the, flat hard-coded numbers, then what you would want to do is you would want to use something like an SVG in order to make sure that is dynamic. And you can find that from either my YouTube video or from Anjay's YouTube video where he actually made this. Okay, but for now, we're going to use the delta bar py. Next, what I like to see is I want the delta py percent to also be the same color. So I'm just going to go here quickly, do the conditional formatting for the font color and make sure that it's values and totals. And once that's there, I'm going to add the delta py percent SVG. Now, you can actually see that the delta py percent SVG doesn't show very well, and I'm going to fix that in just a sec. But this is Anjay's work, which I have run through ChatGPT about 900 times in order to get exactly what I wanted to do. The main thing to know here is that it does work around the delta py, the average delta py, which is all of the different things that I have in here, all of the measures that exist already. But if you wanted to use it yourself, you want to change data description into the name of your table and the lowest granularity that you want to show. So here, description is indeed my lowest hierarchy. And, it's like everything else is basically set for the size that I want to use. And the size that I'm going to use here is actually something that if I go to the format pane and I scroll down, you can go to image size. The height, I'm going to make 20, and the width, I'm going to make 150. And if I do this, you'll actually be able to see that the SVG now shows something which is much more like what I'd actually like to show, cash flow and showing the percentage difference. Let me double check. I had the height as 15, so let's change that height here as well. Okay, great. So this is what I'm going to be using. This is pretty much, it's like most of the changes that I want to do, but I don't want to show these, titles. So you can actually just select these in the column, in the value pane right here. Just hit space bar for one space, and there you go. It will remove the actual title. It does sometimes, make the actual column smaller. So just make sure that you are resizing the column after the fact. Okay, couple more things to know. It doesn't look great if everything is just squished together. So sometimes you want to add some spaces here, but then you realize that the titles aren't following along and it looks weird and kind of janky. And if that's the case, then what you want to do is first space out the visual as large as you'd actually want it to. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to specific column once again. In the specific column, you can click apply to header and apply to total and select an alignment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to align something to the left or the right. Right now we're on delta py%. I'm going to align this to the right. I think aligning to the right is pretty much the way to go for almost everything that is a number, but sometimes you can see that you forget to turn on the header and the totals and it doesn't work all the time. One thing that I think is interesting is if you click apply to header and you click the same alignment multiple times, it will change the alignment of the title, but that's just a small bug, I think. Maybe it's a feature, I don't know. And we're just going to move things around a tiny bit to make things a little bit more spacious. So if I move this right here, okay, that is fine by me. Let's make sure that the AC and PY also are the same. All right, great. So now I feel like I have a little bit more control over how the spacing is. And if you'd like, you can also do a couple of tricks, like you can put in a blank column in between these two items and, it's like make it gray or whatever. I'm not going to do that. That's completely. So now you can actually see that here with operating activities, blah, blah, blah. If it was like this, then net total change is actually going to be very much what I'd like to show. But let's imagine for a second, I didn't have the total cash and the equivalent value in the data set. What that would look like is if I go to, for example, activity type, and I just remove all of the blanks, then you can actually see that this is very much showing the cash flow of that specific year. So past year, 25.9, it's like actual is 42.7. You can even see this in the original. That's this value here, the sum of all of these different items. So now we actually need to make sure that we have the net change, which we can just add back by, it's like removing that filter. And we can actually see net total change. This is good, but this is also not 100% complete. Now, you could just leave it this way if you really wanted to, but I'm going to try to take this a little bit further so that we have net change and total change split by these two different lines. Now, the actual lines here, let's go into that as a formatting option. So first things first, I'm going to remove these plus and minuses because I don't really want people to be able to do that. You can do that by going to row headers and turning off the plus minus icons. Usually I also like to turn off text wrap, but that's just because sometimes I hide columns, but that doesn't really matter too much. Also, you can choose to make the text bold if you want. I don't, because it likes to, I can differentiate between the description and the totals, and I think that's really, really important. Okay, and then some of the cooler things that have also been added here is the blank rows. Now, if I click blank rows on, you can actually see now there's a little bit of space. Some blank rows have been added in between each different item. And you can even go so far as to click on border. And if you do that, now there's a really interesting phenomenon where there's a border in between every single different item. You can actually see that the border, you can set it to be a specific color, it's like a specific size and width. Fine, that's pretty nice. It does look a little bit like this border is a bit darker than the others. I think that might just be my screen more than anything else. I don't think that's supposed to be that way. But let's put it this way, and let's say you've got a bunch of different items, and this would be pretty good in it's like overall. But the main problem here now is total cash and equivalent and net change. And do you necessarily want to have lines between all of these? You could, but if you wanted to have lines just between for example, the actual cash flow activities and what is the start of the year and the end of the year, the way that you have to do that is a little bit more annoying. It feels a bit more hacky than, best practice. So do keep that in mind. I've got another column here, which I showed you, which has total cash start of year. And so those aren't supposed to be there. That's fine. Total cash start of year, that's the actual type, and the rest is blank. And I'm going to add this type to the top of the row hierarchy. And if I do that and I drill down to every level, you'll actually see that this is what builds the hierarchy. Okay, one thing that I have to do is I need to make sure that my canvas format is 20. And if that's the case, then I made the size 2. So global fonts, let's make the font size 12. Maybe 14 would be fine. Okay, sure. Font size 14 and everything still fits. That's much better. Okay, now you'll actually see that if I order everything by activity type, then I've got this where I have an operating activity. But now the problem is that, yes, I've been able to change the name net total change. And instead of, just showing net total change, I'm showing, it's like net total change here and there. That's not exactly perfect. And this is the main reason that I have an additional hierarchy, because I don't want this part to indicate net change. No, I want this to be total cash and cash equivalents beginning of year. The problem here is that if you turn on a row subtotal, you can't turn it off for a specific item. Not really. And this kind of, it's like this sucks a little, but it's okay. First, what we're going to do is we're going back to row subtotals, and we're going to change the last total here into something else. So with this last total, we're going to call, what was it called? Total cash end of year. Go here, total cash end year. And you can see that that's been changed up here, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And for this specific item, if I go to all and I select underline, then that underlines every single total, which could be what you want, and maybe it's not. And if you apply this to labels, it actually changes, it's like the labels as well, which is fine. But if I wanted to only underline the bottom part there, I think the way that you do it is you go to row grand total and you underline only this item. So that way, only the last item is formatted. It's really nice that they do have a slightly different formatting for just the grand total, but I do wish that there was a little bit more for everything. Okay, so that's really nice, but okay, I'm going to need to turn on text wrap again, row header. That allows me to move this around a little bit. But now we have basically 3 different values, which are exactly the same. I don't want. How do I get rid of that? So I created a calculation group that I'm going to add to this it's like value. I'm going to turn this calculation item on, and that's going to remove the additional items. So now it does still have this net total change as an additional text, but for me, it still looks pretty good. I'm okay with that. This total cash start of year is in this one line, and you can see it's just that one value. It's still very clear to me that, and hopefully for other people too, that the net total change of all the cash flow items is still the last, it's like row. It's not as apparent as I would like it to be, but it's pretty close. But this calculation group, how am I doing that? The way that it's actually working is that this calculation group is taking it's a little, it feels really hacky. If the selected value of the data type, so if the data type here is total cash start of year, and the it's like hierarchy scope is activity type or data description, then it's blank. Otherwise, it's going to show the selected measure. And I've put this as a calculation group because if I didn't do it this way, then I would need to add that condition to every single measure in order for that, it's like to disappear. So not the best way of doing this, really, but it is a way to get rid of like 2 additional repetitions and still give you total cash start of year, total cash end of year, so that you can have this completely, reasonably good cash flow statements. If you wanted to go a little bit further and change a couple more things, of course, you could just go into the format. My recommendations would be, of course, to go into the data, remove, for example, type from the rows. Okay, it's doing that. Remove the type name, remove the activity type name, and remove the description. So once you remove all of these things, then it looks a little bit cleaner. I'm okay with this. I like this a lot more, to be honest. Let's go to column headers. We can make them bolded and maybe slightly bigger so that they're a bit more prominent. And that's honestly just about all of the changes that I would make. Maybe I would make things a little bit larger or more spacious. And in order to make them a little bit more spacious like this, what you need to do is you need to go to the filters again, or to the formatting pane. And if you go to grid here, you can either attach a horizontal grid, which will show lines. So so if I put it a specific color, you can see the lines very clearly. But if you just want it to be a little bit more spacious, you can put on row padding, in the options, and you can make the row padding a specific size so that it goes a little bit bigger and smaller. That's also coincidentally where global font size exists. Row padding is really nice when if you're using conditional formatting because it also adds a little bit of space between these items. And you can also add vertical lines here to make things a little bit easier. Okay, so that was everything. If you learned something here and you want to know a little bit more about some cool tips that you can use for tables, I do recommend checking out my video and Anshay's video. But thanks for watching. Take care.